Hey guys, Asian Kyle here, bringing you part 2 on my original video talking about the 940. This video is kind of going to be just a little bit more of a comparison between the 940-1 and the original 940. So, just to get us kind of started off here, let's go and talk about the blades. As you know, the original 940 comes in just a standard S30V. In my findings and my tests, I found that their S30V isn't heat treated quite as well as, say, Spyderco. But the heat treat is still decent enough for this thing to be called S30V. And then against that is the S90V found in the 940-1. So, kind of just regarding the steels, the S30V it's not as hard, as you know, as the S90V. But with that comes a trade-off of sharpenability. The S90V, I'm honestly really afraid to let this thing get dull just because it's going to be so tough to sharpen. Once it gets that way, it may have to go back to Benchmade to get factory edged all over again. Versus with the S30V, you know, this has kind of turned into my beater knife a little bit ever since kind of that happened. I just cared just a little bit less about keeping it nice. I've also dropped it up here on one of these two top corners, so it's okay. But like I said, I don't care about keeping it quite as dressy. But back to the blades. You know, I find that the S30V, I'm really not afraid to kind of thump on a little bit more, simply because I know I can put that edge back on it whenever I need to. However, I'm pleased to say that both of these edges do strap up very, very nicely, and therefore they look good in the end too. So it enables me to get that final little hair-popping edge on them. So just since we're still talking about blades, I just want to talk a little bit about the differences between the S30V and the S90V. If you've done any research into them, you know that the S30V was created with Crucible and Chris Reeve to create a steel that would be very good on edge retention, but also very good on corrosion resistance as well, and also make it stainless to keep it that way. Reeve wanted his knives to not necessarily have the best steel out there, but moreover the best overall general well-rounded steel, so that way his knives would last through the ages. So Crucible also made the S90V, and they've done a very, very good job. What makes the S90V hold its edge for so much longer is the fact it's a harder steel. Don't confuse that with toughness. Toughness is the ability for a steel to, say, resist being pried on and not snap. S30V is very tough, but it's not as hard as S90V. S90V, if you put it in a vise and try and snap it, according to tests, will snap much easier. However, with it being a harder steel, it will hold its edge for a much longer time. So that's part of what makes the steels a little different and why S30V is a little easier to sharpen in the end. But like I already said, I'm very afraid for the day whenever my S90V runs dull and my sharp maker is just not able to sharpen it. It probably will have to go back to the factory to get that edge put back on it. One thing that I will say about the 940-1 is I'm not going to do it right now because I just dropped it up last night, so it's incredibly sharp. But I found the edge on this to be a little bit more toothy, and that's mainly due to the vanadium carbides in there, which make it so the edge holds its retention for a very long time. So it's much toothier, and it doesn't shave through paper quite as easily as the S30V, but it still does a decent job. Moving on to the handle materials on both, as you can see, and as I said, carbon fiber versus aluminum. My biggest worry with carbon fiber, and it's always been my worry with anything carbon fiber, is what happens if I drop it. You know, on the aluminum version, there we go, that little mark right there, camera's not wanting to zoom today, but that little mark right there was what happened whenever I dropped it and attempted to catch it on its way down to meet its final destination, being the concrete floor. But that's all that happened to the aluminum, is it just got a little chip in the anodized green. But like I said, my biggest fear is what happens whenever I finally do drop a carbon fiber handled knife. Is the edge, or not the edge, sorry, is the impact area going to be kind of sharp and toothy like fiberglass, or is it still going to be just as buttery smooth as all these edges are? And with that in mind, I'm kind of worried about the longevity of carbon fiber versus the aluminum, simply because it's a material that's been woven and been pressed and hardened to look that way. Versus the aluminum, it's just CNC machined, so it's a solid piece of physical material, not multiple pieces of material that don't physically really equal anything solid, for lack of better terms. So, do I think one is more beautiful than the other? Yes, and you probably should too. The carbon fiber is just absolutely gorgeous versus the green anodized aluminum of the regular 940. I'm not the biggest fan of the green just because it kind of sticks out of your pocket like a sore thumb. Some people really dig it. I think it's alright. But that's just kind of my take on the handles anyways. Kind of with those, since we're doing more of a direct comparison, even though the 940 is much lighter, it is also thicker, I noticed, than the original 940. So even though it's lighter, it's thicker, a little heavier but thinner. You know, in all honesty, with the weights being so close and the handle thicknesses being similar, I really don't notice them in pocket as being any different at all. I do notice the slight weight difference of the 940-1, but like I said, you're comparing essentially a smaller apple versus a slightly smaller apple. So they're both still apples in the end. And these are both still Benchmade 940s. I really don't notice that much of a difference in pocket, even though one's lighter but thicker and one's slimmer but heavier. They're both great knives in pocket. They both carry very well, especially after the addition of the Parkerized split arrow clip from Benchmade that they sent me. As far as the dimensions go, like I already said, slightly thicker but lighter, slightly thinner but a little heavier, but they are exactly the same length overall, and the blade is exactly the same, just with different steels. So, on to probably the biggest question people have, and as they've probably seen in other YouTube or Blade Forum reviews, what about the quality? And you know, that's kind of whenever I start to waver a little bit with the 940-1. I paid well over $200 for this knife, and as far as quality is concerned, I'm a little disappointed with it. Kind of like I showed you in my first video, I've got two little striations right here. The light will cooperate a little bit. Yeah, kind of right there where my thumb is. Those two little striations. We've also got this really funky cut right there from the grind. It's very off-centered. This one's okay, so it's not that bad. It's still just a smidgen off, and you have these these grinds coming up a little high on this unsharpened area and the Picasso on both sides. One of my biggest pet peeves about looking at this one is the fact you can see those screws sticking through the handle. And for a knife that costs this much, I know I shouldn't expect Chris Reeve quality out of it, but at the same time, you know, some of these things are very easy to catch and to fix and to manage if you just pay attention a little bit. But other than those few things, I found that this knife is built very, very well, and its quality is definitely redeeming of Benchmade. I really like it. The blade centering is just a smidgen off, just barely. There we go. Now the light's not in it. Yeah, like I said, just barely off. It's not gonna end the world for me. Doesn't matter. But with this one, I found the quality level on it was just much, much higher. And that might be partially because they've been making this particular knife for years now. The only things that I've really found that I've had any issue with is that this pivot does come loose much easier than the other one. I've had to oil it. It also doesn't hold the oil quite as well. But really the only thing quality-wise that I have any gripes about is this screw right here. I'm pretty sure it was stripped from the factory. I mean, I keep trying to twist it and it just spins. So I just put a little bit of Loctite in to keep the screw in, but it's got another 2 screws on it, so it doesn't really bother me too much. But like I said, overall in quality, I find that the original 940 is just built with better quality than the Dash 1. They're both still good knives. I like them both a lot, so let's go on to my next page here. So, kind of in summary with comparing both of these knives directly, which one would I recommend? Honestly, I recommend that you get them both. Yeah, very helpful, but they are that awesome. If I were to lose one of these, I would still end up replacing it with the exact same one if I could, if money allowed and everything else. But what about for you? And really what it comes down to is which one are you planning on using for which? In my uses, I use my original 940 as more of my EDC beater knife, since right now I work in a warehouse with my job. It's a knife I'm not afraid to kind of dig into boxes and dull up the edge and drop and and let things scrape against. It's a very well built knife. If you search the images on Google, you'll find that this knife has, with some people, seen lots of use where the anodized green is coming off around the edges and up through here and around the axis from people actuating the axis lock over years and years, and you'll see that they've dropped it and everything else, and it starts to look kind of cool because it's wearing its age quite nicely. This is a knife that people will EDC for years because it's reliable. This one, on the other hand, kind of like I said, I'm really nervous about dropping and really beating up just because I don't know how the carbon fiber is going to handle all that wear and tear and abuse essentially over the years. It looks beautiful now, but what about in 6 years from now? Is it still going to look the same, or is it going to start showing with its beautiful top coat starting to kind of flake off and chip off, kind of like you see in cars whenever they get rocks chipped into them on parts of their cars that they've upgraded to carbon fiber? It just makes me a little bit nervous. I don't really know how it's going to behave over the next several years. So if I were you, I would really ask myself, what am I planning on using my knife for? If you're planning on looking for an addition to your collection and you really don't hard use your knives, but something that you want to look beautiful in pocket, I highly recommend that you save up and you spend a little bit of extra to get the 940-1. This is such a beautiful knife. The carbon fiber on it is absolutely stunning. And when you put it in your pocket, you feel it, but not as much as you think you will. And more than that, when you pull it out of your pocket, the people you're around will see that and they're like, well, that's a very impressive looking knife. But like I said, this makes a great gentleman's folder. Versus the original 940, if you're looking for a knife that you can carry around for years and really kind of beat on and put through the ring, I really recommend that you go with this guy. This is a very time-tested and proven design with the aluminum handles and this backspacer right here. You look all over the Google images and you'll find photos of people's knives that have seen years of wear and tear and use, and they still carry them because they're still just as awesome. So I really like both of these, and I don't know if Benchmade's going to watch this video or not. Kind of hope you guys do. One thing I'd really like to see you do in the future is come out with another titanium handled version of this, but instead of having all your screws and your, oops, you can't really see the liner in that one very easily, but having your liner in here, it would be really awesome if you came out with full titanium handles. Just a pillar construction just like this one, but no steel liner. So that way you eliminate all these other screws except for your pivot and maybe the screw back here and this one right here. That would just look really cool. It'd keep the lines very clean looking, and you would still maintain a very strong and beautiful knife. So anyway guys, hey, that's just kind of my take on the difference between the 940 and the 940-1. It's really up to you. One more time, if you're planning on going more a gentleman's direction where you're not going to really hard use your knife, I highly recommend that you save your money and you pick up this one. But if you're planning on really EDCing your knife every day and just putting it through the ropes, I really recommend this one. However, you won't go wrong with choosing either of them. I have both of them, I love both of them, and I'll probably end up keeping both of them for years and eventually passing them on to one of my kids. So anyway guys, this is Asian Kyle signing off, bringing you my direct comparison between the Benchmade 940 and the Benchmade 940-1.